We're fortunate enough to have a bunch of, I guess, founder friends or networks around us that we leverage. So we started doing a lot of customer interviews, customer discovery, validation type work. And we got a range of different things. I think one of the patterns we saw is most founders don't even know what they need help with. And they have like sometimes very superficial things like, oh, I need help with fundraising. If you really need help with fundraising, or if you're really hitting a wall with that, maybe there's an underlying reason, right? Maybe you're just not ready. Maybe you don't have right network or the right contacts. Maybe you don't have the traction that you need.
Hi, my name is Dimitri Panici, and I'm a content creator, agency owner, and AI enthusiast. You're listening to the AI Agents Podcast, brought to you by Jotform, and featuring our very own CEO and founder, Ida Tank. This is the show where artificial intelligence meets innovation, productivity, and the tools shaping the future of work. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the AI Agents Podcast. In this episode, we have the founder and CEO, Samim Safaei. He is the founder and CEO of Sift AI, and we're really excited to have him on today. How are you doing, Samim?
Doing good, Dimitri. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Really appreciate you for making the time.
Likewise.
Um, I know that we've kind of ping ponged this a little bit for a while, so I'm really excited to finally get chatting with you. What would you say, first and foremost, is kind of your story as to how you got into AI, and then after that, how you had the idea for SIFT?
Yeah, sure. So I got into AI a couple startups ago. Zipt is my fifth startup, but my third was actually in the music space. We basically developed a music visualization platform. So something like a smart disco ball that could visualize the emotion that you hear in music. And we had this whole strategy, and this is pre-GPT days, um, kind of training an ML model and mapping the sounds that you hear to the AI to the audio, from the audio spectrum to the visual spectrum. And that kind of got my curiosity peaking because I'm an engineer by trade, but very much like product focused and kind of trending more towards product over time. So I started to see the magic of how AI could really fill some of the gaps and solve some of the really tough problems that are out there. So yeah, that was years ago now, but over time, I started to kind of see after GPT came out and all the generative AI stuff that there was a huge boom in what people could create, myself included. I was tinkering a lot with different tools, but the kind of support and the kind of guidance that entrepreneurs had still was very minimal. It still felt like when I was doing my first startup. And even though it's kind of mainstream now and people are doing startups and there's lots and lots of founders compared to, over 10 years ago, there's still a lack of support and guidance for those people. And so we got to thinking about, okay, well, ChatGPT is cool, Claude is cool, but they aren't really geared towards the founder's journey and helping people turn their ideas into viable businesses. And so that was kind of like the genesis of Sift, and that was just under a year ago now. Last May is when we started it, and it was really cool because me and my team have a lot of experience building products and being founders before the AI age. And so, we've read the books, we know kind of the frameworks and stuff that used to exist, and are now in the process of adapting those and mapping those to kind of a more AI native workflow and AI native kind of like tool.
Yeah, no. So talk a little bit about what it was like to be in that realm beforehand, and kind of how you've seen it quickly change and adapt. I know that there's
Yep.
I mean, a lot of different people who are coming at this from this perspective of only having experienced AI where we're at now, and not really seeing that transition.
Yeah, sure. So back in the day, gosh, this makes me sound old, but back in the day,
Back in my day.
yeah, we would follow frameworks like Lean Canvas. We would read books like Lean Startup, and we would try to apply or kind of manually do a lot of the strategy or the thinking around how to build a business. It was very slow. It was very granular, which in a way was good because it made you think about things. But as you can imagine, there's a lot more barriers there. There's a lot less that you can get done in a day or in a week. And so it was much harder, a much bigger commitment for you to try to build a business. And nowadays, in our last project before this, we used ChatGPT, and it was great. It did, very quick market research run for us, or it would go and, brainstorm ideas for us. But we found that as you were kind of evolving your business or kind of iterating, which is inevitable because you're never going to get it right on your first guess across all the different components or all the different aspects of a business, right? Um, you need to kind of like experiment and iterate. And the chat GPT we were using, the AIs that exist now, even today, they're not really built for that like iterative kind of like ideation and context. They hit memory problems, they hit scaling problems. And so we kind of couldn't pivot or we couldn't evolve our business after a year of using this chat GPT or using this project uh, the way that we normally would have done. And it was kind of worse because all our context, all our suggestions, all the kind of like um, intel was baked into this GPT or baked into this project, and we couldn't really surface it or we couldn't really like adapt it in an easy way. So in some ways, we were actually flying more blind using ChatGPT as founders than we used to be when we didn't even have access to those tools.
Yeah, and we were actually talking prior to the call about some ChatGPT stuff, and maybe we'll get into that later in regards to the inevitable downfall of OpenAI. No, just kidding. Um, but how, when you're going about building a product, I know we're really excited to see what you're doing as this is about to launch. How did you go about figuring out what is a priority to people, right, versus what's out there already? What was kind of your approach on figuring out how to fill in those gaps, so to speak?
Yeah. So we were fortunate enough to have a bunch of, I guess, founder friends or networks around us that we leverage. So we started doing a lot of customer interviews, customer discovery, validation type work, and we got a range of different things. I think one of the patterns we saw is most founders don't even know what they need help with, and they have like sometimes very superficial things like, "Oh, I need help with fundraising." Um, but if you really need help with fundraising, or if you're really hitting a wall with that, maybe there's an underlying reason, right? Maybe you're just not ready. Maybe you don't have right network or the right contacts. Maybe you don't have the traction that you need yet for that, right? So it could be a whole bunch of different things, but it's tough to tell people that, and it's tough to articulate that, especially as founders. And again, I'm talking about myself here, but you get very precious about your idea. It's your baby, and it's very hard to trust somebody who doesn't have anywhere near as much context or anywhere near as much insight into the situation that you're in to give you advice because you think, oh, they don't get it. They don't
Yeah.
know this thing that I know, or they don't understand the market as deeply as I do, or whatever it may be. And so it's tough because a lot of these founders are isolated and they don't really even have a clear understanding of their problems. But we did see a lot of patterns over time as we started to do more and more rounds of testing. We saw that a lot of people had that issue actually in a more kind of simple way. They didn't even know what to ask the ChatGPT. They didn't know where to go with it. There was a directional issue. Are they obsessing over the product? Are they like premature solutioning, for example, when they should be, I don't know, doing more interviews, talking to more people? Um, Another thing that we saw was, okay, they did some interviews and then they quickly like check off the box. Okay, yeah, I validated my idea. People want this thing, but maybe they didn't quite validate it as deeply as they should have. Again, I'm very guilty of hearing what I want to hear in some of these interviews, or maybe asking a biased question. And that's no different with ChatGPT. If I go to ChatGPT, actually a very funny one, I don't know if they fixed this, but and I think exists across most of these models, but if you go to it and you give it an idea, and then you go back to it and you give it another idea, and you use the word new. So, hey, here's idea A. What do you think of idea A? It'll tell you probably something like you're absolutely right, blah blah blah, all this yes manning, which is another issue. But it'll come back and you say, okay, well, what about idea B? What about this new idea? It tends to prefer the new idea, even if it's a worse idea, to the first
Yeah,
idea, second to the old idea, right? So it
sure.
has this constant like kind of people pleasing and constant kind of like bias towards this information, which is really really tricky. And to kind of, I guess, talk about there's a couple other things, but to kind of summarize the issues that we saw, Vibe coding is a big thing nowadays, and a lot of people are talking about vibe marketing. And I think the one that is the funniest to me is vibe revenue, um, because it kind of ties into this bigger concept that we've been trying to explore called vibe founding. And vibe founding is kind of just building a business based on vibes and kind of emotions and hunches and stuff rather than like logic and data. And I am, an OG vibe founder. I'll be the first to admit that. But it's really tricky nowadays to avoid vibe founding because you go to chat and it tells you everything you're doing is right. It gives you this very like biased
Does.
feedback. And a lot of it is just tied to the specific questions you ask, how you ask those questions, and then of course, what you do with that information afterwards. So vibe founding is becoming more and more prevalent, and that vibe founding is really being amplified by these yes man chatbots.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that there's generally like an issue right now with AI, like you said, trying to do stuff that it almost feels like it's this recursive or like it's not cyclical. It's a feedback loop that's constant. So I work with a lot of different tools. I do content, and a lot of that's like blog or like SEO related. And a
Mm,
big issue right now is you even have tools that are having to utilize sources like Reddit. We actually just interviewed somebody who's doing a lot of zero click search and AI SEO
mm,
as a company, and they actually have to use Reddit on OpenAI as one of their primary sources
mm,
because Reddit has an incredibly anti-AI, has an incredible anti-AI layer, whereas they can't even trust like blogs generated anymore because everybody used AI within the first 6 to 12 months when the web search capability came out to create blogs. So they're kind of they're kind of screwed because if they use web search with the LLM, at first, it would probably add something outside of the context of the LLM, but until they retweaked the algorithm to add a lot of Reddit, it was just talking to itself basically over and over again and saying the same stuff. But now, I mean, it's Reddit, right? So like the information can be false pretty frequently. And there's a reason people will a colloquial jab at people if they make a dumb argument. Is like that's a Reddit tier argument, right? So this is kind of the funny world we live in, is it's almost like it's a very self-affirming, system, for sure, if you let it get away from you.
exactly. Yeah, no, the echo chambers are just getting I guess more robust, and the noise is just getting amplified.
Yeah. So what do you think is, some of the cool features that you're gonna wanna bring, and, like, what are some of the people who are some of the main people that you hope are gonna use your product or
Uh,
industries as well?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think Vibe Founders is a natural one. I think a lot of people who maybe aren't very technical or haven't started businesses before are now being empowered to make projects and start businesses, which is amazing. But oftentimes they don't have the experience, training, or maybe even the time to think more about their strategy or their go to market or their validation or anything like that. So I think Vibe founders, first time founders, young founders, solopreneurs, that's another big one. One of the big issues that I've experienced, and I still struggle with today, is just trying to filter my biases and my blind spots, like anybody else. And as a solopreneur, that's extra risky because you have nobody to kind of answer to. You have nobody to kind of like talk through things to, except for these yes man chatbots. So having a way to actually actively filter against that, and having a way to kind of sound your strategy and think through things in a more kind of like granular and logical fashion, um, is one of the big things that we offer in our platform. Um, we talk about things like structure as a service. So you have, structured databases, you have like tables and stuff like that. You have unstructured data, like all these chats, but sometimes you need structure, even in those unstructured chats. And if you go to ChatGPT and you say, "Hey, give me a business plan," and it spews out some long thing, chances are there are some nuggets in there that are valuable to you. But a lot of it isn't valuable to you. And maybe a lot of it is kind of valuable, but it needs to be updated over time. And so a lot of this just like essentially sifting or pulling out nuggets and being able to manage that data and keep it updated and validate it and stuff like that are things that are core to our MVP. And I think people are going to be pretty excited when they see it because the UI and a lot of the stuff we built is proprietary. And we're trying to create this hybrid between a chat and something that's more structured, like a Notion or like an Asana.
Yeah, that's a interesting kind of balance. I think a lot of AI tools are trying to find, like, how much you just want to be like the theoretical great tool that, in the long term could exist, with like a bunch of connections to different MCPs, and you can do everything by just chatting with it, and then it sends out its other tools. And also, what is the, yeah, exactly. Like, it's kind of a weird balance to find it. And how have you been trying to achieve that balance? What is kind of your plan there, and how have you gone about
Yeah.
tweaking and reiterating?
Yeah. So I think chat is essential. Maybe voice in the future. Um, but a picture is worth a thousand words. And so having some sort of visual display, whether that's a canvas or whether that's a table or whether that's some sort of dashboard, I think is a lot more efficient and a lot more intuitive than just having to like scroll up through a conversation thread and try to find a piece of information. So that's kind of one of the main things is we think about the chat as the main communication mechanism, but then there's this like filtering layer or there's this kind of extraction service that happens and then pulls that information into this structured view or into this dashboard that helps you kind of just maintain that big picture awareness. So as we do that, it gets very interesting, right? Because then there's talk of like what topics do you want to extract? How do you want to like organize or order that information? Because another big thing that happens in the founder's journey is you have parallel ideas and you don't know which one is right. You know, maybe there are two assumptions you have on the problem that you're trying to solve, and maybe they both kind of sound correct, but one is a lot more of a deeper pain point or a lot more kind of important than the other one. Well, how do you manage parallel context threads, and how do you update different pieces of context as they become validated or as they become disproven and expired over time, right? When you're pivoting or when you're kind of evolving your business over time, a lot of the initial thoughts that you had just they're not relevant anymore. You thought the problem you're solving was this; it ended up actually being something else. And so when a generic or traditional chatbot thread, all that context is kind of like lost and convoluted in the same plane. There's only like one plane of truth, or there's only one plane of context. And so that's why, if in 6 months or whenever you want to pivot and say, okay, we're not doing that anymore, we're trying to focus on a different problem, there's a lot of root causes for hallucination and a lot of potential issues that arise because it can't differentiate those things that are no longer relevant or no longer valid versus the things that are. And if you introduce a new problem, then it has like all these contradictions in the context. So having this structure and having this ability to do that is actually something um, that we're trying to patent. And that's not like in a patent troll kind of way, but it's really just so we can protect the mission and protect the overall kind of um, enterprise that we're trying to build here, which is meant to empower the founders. So it's pretty cool because we have this weighted context system, and it has the ability to essentially weight the importance or the relevance or the validity of certain context as you evolve your thinking and as your business builds, regardless of the scale you're at and the amount of context that you built.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. And it's been kind of a difficult thing as time's gone on. I feel like with a lot of these AI tools where there's been a lot of creep of, I don't want to say not scope creep, but people will try to implement what they are using with these AI tools, and it doesn't end up like getting them anywhere, right? Like there was that one report that came out that, what, like 90% of like pilots for AI were just not getting a positive ROI, I
Yeah.
think. Granted, I have questions about that study. But like, I could believe it. I could believe that there was failure. But how are you going to make it as easy as possible for founders to be empowered versus what you feel like a lot of the other tools are lacking, right? Like, how are you going to prevent that from happening to what you're doing?
So I think for us, a lot of it comes down to the Zork problem, as we're calling it. Have you ever played Zork?
Now, what the heck is Lurk?
Zork is like an old, like geeky, like 1970s video game. Um, and it was essentially like a command line interface where you would play in this like imaginary world. So it would basically be like there is a door, and that's it. And then you'd have to say like
Mhm.
open door, and it'd say no, door's locked, and it would give you nothing else. Like there's minimal information. It's all on the back end. There's this like really incredibly rich map of different scenarios and kind of like places built out. And it was one of the first instances of essentially people trying to have a conversational UX and steer that conversation when they have a user come into the flow. So it forces you. It's actually really brilliant. It forces you to think because at first you're like you're just laughing. You're like, well, what am I supposed to do here? But then you're like, hold on. What if I try this? No, what if I try this? And it gets your kind of creative juices flowing, and it really like works your imagination. But tying that into what your question was, the problem with like a lot of these chat tools or a lot of things the founders do today is they can't they don't know what to ask or they ask them the wrong thing. And so they're staring at this blank kind of like conversation line, kind of like Zork. Um, and they have to sit there and kind of like really scratch their head and think about what to type in. But I think one of the best ways to and easiest ways to start empowering founders is by just giving them the right questions or giving them the right suggestions to ask or to maybe like pick through so that they can start going. Because if you come into chat, like, okay, sure, go use ChatGPT or Claude right now. I mean, Claude is obviously doing really amazing stuff these days, but there's still a directionality or agency problem, right? What do you ask it? In what order do you ask it those things? You know, when do you ask it something after you've asked it this last thing? Like there's an incredibly complex dependency tree that can build there. And it's very much tied to what is your overall goal or your overall intent that you're trying to get at. And in something like Claude or a generic chatbot, it's very hard to do that because it's a general purpose tool by definition. But in something like Sift, it has a very specialized function. We're meant to help people de-risk, accelerate, and succeed in their founder's journey. So there are playbooks, there are books, there are frameworks, there are a lot of things that are built out already that say, you know, this is step one, this is step two, step three. If you don't do this right, you know, this is step 3A, this is step 3B, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that I think is quite unique and one of the really key advantages of using a specialized system for a specialized use case like this, because founders have to deal with something quite unique compared to, you know, just general work or productivity apps.
Yeah, no, they are. There, it is very specific. I agree. I don't think that there's actually the hard thing with a lot of work that founders do is it is so specialized. Because you're building something specialized, else the business is, you know, a little bit DOA, dead on arrival. But that's a yeah, that's a very good point. Have you actually just out of curiosity? Obviously, it's going to launch really soon. Really excited for it. Do you use it yourself for a lot of your own stuff, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, we're starting to use it. I mean, we've had some delays just due to the complexity on the back end, as you can imagine. But as the tool has kind of become available now for our own internal use, uh, recently we've been starting to see some really interesting. It's still quite manual. It doesn't have the level of like kind of automation or guidance that we want it to have. But we're starting to see a lot of really granular thinking and a lot of like dependency mapping that you just don't get in a chatbot. So like I would, for example, be like, you know what, I want to test out TikTok as a channel. And you know, chat AI, chat GPT or Claude will say, okay, cool. Like, yeah, here's, you know, here's some plans for how you can test out TikTok and blah, 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 blah. But Sif will take that and say, okay, are you sure you want to test out TikTok? Because you told me that this is like the audience that you're going after. And that audience isn't usually on TikTok. You know, we can try it, but at least it surfaces this thing. So it helps me, you know, it helps me really refine my strategy and be more coherent in my approach to things because it has this much deeper ontology and much deeper dependency map than just like a black box LLM embedding system.
Yeah, no, that's fair. What do you think is some of the this is where you're starting. Where do you think the goal is for you in the like final, or at least current mental framework of improved product? I know it's like, oh, we're only at the beginning, but where do you think it's going to go above and beyond from where it's already at?
Yeah, so I think it'll be a lot more guided and automated. I'm hoping we can integrate a lot of the cool kind of crowdsourced automations and skills and stuff that we're seeing, like even in the recent days um, in the cloud ecosystem. I think that our vision for Sift is for it to be the founders platform. So it's not trying to specialize on market research or on, you know, vibe coding or anything like that. It doesn't do anything like that. It's really meant to be this intelligent filter or this platform that founders can use to kind of kickstart their business and de-risk their projects. And I think over time it would be really cool. This probably won't happen for a while, but I think it'd be really cool for us to integrate a lot of other really um, useful and creative ecosystems and third-party tools that are out there, because there's a whole wave of really exciting stuff happening, as you show on this podcast, and as a lot of the other guests have said, like there's some really cool vibe coding communities, solopreneur communities, builder communities, just in general, that we don't want to compete with, but we want to empower.
Yeah, no, totally. And empowering founders this year, I think, it kind of leads into a question. What are your thoughts in general about how the solopreneur landscape is going to change in 2026? Obviously, AI agents were a big thing in 2025. How do you think the solopreneur landscape is going to continue to change and improve with what you experience in, day to day, conversations now? I'm really intrigued to kind of hear your thoughts because I know that people are going to be able to be more lean, be able to be more agile. And I'm curious what like actual practical impact that's going to have on businesses. How many more people do you think are going to take that route? Do you think and also how do you think it'll impact the general knowledge work environment too?
Good question. Couple of thoughts. So I think that this is my context, and feel free to disagree or ask uh, for clarification. But the solopreneur market has been seeing a big boom, right? These tools, vibe coding tools, AI tools, they've been really already empowering and breaking down barriers to enable more and more people to build their own businesses and be their own boss. And I think that a lot of the hype or froth that we saw in 2025 is going to start to kind of melt in 2026. So a lot of people are building the same tool, and a lot of them aren't that differentiated or necessarily better than the other ones. And I think that that's just kind of inevitable and natural, and maybe just early days, because as you get a more and more flooded or saturated marketplace, you get commodification, and then you're going to have smaller niches or have to have more kind of strategic or competitive offerings in those markets. So I think that the million AI SDR tools that you see out there, for example, aren't all going to go away. I think some of them have value, but probably a portion of them will stop doing what they're doing. I think a big portion of them will pivot and maybe find a slightly different way to add more compelling value and have like better traction. And then I think a few of them probably will um, stay as they are, and maybe harden some of the things that are working, and double down there. But I think you're going to get this maturation, or at least the start of maturation in that market. And I think that market is probably going to continue growing, but it's probably not going to like explode, or at least not continue to explode on like an exponential curve. Maybe an S curve, but not so much, just like a raw exponential growth for the entire year. Maybe there's still a lot of growth left, but I think that it's going to plateau over time, and maybe that won't be this year. But the good news there is that like that market is going to grow. So I think the solopreneur market, not only is it growing, but like a lot of these tools and a lot of the problems that they're solving, and Sift is no exception to that. They're solving problems for other solopreneurs. They're solving problems for other small businesses, and they're really changing the small business landscape. And I think that's really exciting, because small business, I think the future is small business. I think the future is entrepreneurial. And I think that small business is like um, a really exciting place to be, because even those pilots that you talk about, a lot of the issues, like I've seen some of these large organizations, I've been kind of involved in some of the pilots. I won't name names, but it's not necessarily like a technology problem. It's more of a people problem, an adoption problem, and implementation problem. And these are like classic problems. This isn't something new, right? And so as we start to see more and more of those enterprises adopt AI and have success, I think we're going to see many, many more small businesses have success. So the gap between small business competitiveness, advantage, AI adoption, capability versus enterprise is only going to increase. And I think a lot of like the legacy issues that we've seen in enterprise are only going to get worse.
Interesting. Okay. Do you think that enterprises are going to struggle with being able to keep up with some of these lean teams?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. If there's a team of one and doing the work of 10 and the company's earning the revenue of a company of 100 people or 200 people, how do you compete with that? Right. Especially if that company is self funded or bootstrapped and doesn't have any financial pressures to sell or be acquired by your enterprise. You know, I think that those enterprises are going to start to see a lot more competition from that front. And of course, layoffs and a lot of the other stuff that we're seeing happen in the enterprise world um, are only another negative feedback loop that they're feeling. So I think a lot of people used to go to big companies because there was job security there was work life balance there. But this is pure speculation on my part. But I would bet that a lot of those advantages or perks of working at a big company or an enterprise are slowly eroding away as AI becomes adopted more and more, and as we kind of like go into 2026.
Yeah, I would agree. I definitely think that there's a bit of a problem right now with working at a enterprise company, and that is you've been in a position where there is a full scale understanding that working at an enterprise often is working up from somebody who is is working as the operational function of the business to being a middle management person. And then a lot of those people end up losing the skill, right? At some point, right? They haven't worked in them for a while. And if this is talked about at the lower levels of business, every single big, CEO and exec knows this. So, I mean, there's even the phrase cushy middle management. I mean, like it's like we have colloquial terms for this for a
Yeah,
reason because it's well known. I would just say very, very much on the same page with you that job security at enterprise, I think, as things have got more efficient, is definitely going to be. I don't think there was going to be nearly as much of a well. Um, I think the place that you'll be the most secure is at a SMB where you're a top performer, and they don't really want to add middle management because they can just have director agents or something to delegate tasks. Honestly, but when you work at this middle management, like you end up going from person who does the work to person who manages people during the work, and on paper they don't really output anything. So you can just be like, oh, 150K, huh?
uh-huh.
I only have to pay like 5 grand and like resources for that. Nice.
Yeah,
Right. And it's just very basic math for them at that point, which in a free enterprise, I honestly don't blame them because it's kind of funny. I think the people in that position have been aware that they're chilling for a while. And then I think the layoffs on an operational standpoint, if people are doing substantive work, is a more upsetting thing, probably. Right.
yeah,
I think the middle management type of stuff, I would ask the person to look in the mirror and say, we know that there's more of a direct correlation between disliking your job because you're not fulfilled, not because you're not getting paid enough. And I'm asking you candidly, are you in the former? Because, if you're like, is this actually a bad thing you're not in this position anymore?
yeah, yeah,
Like a lot of people usually are like, work's whatever. And it's not because they're overworked. You hear the people who work too much talk about work.
yeah,
You'll hear the people who don't get paid enough talk about work. They may still like it. The people who are middle management that don't do that much are like, work's work. And I'm like, it's like, I don't feel like you're passionate about this. So hopefully it gives them a kick in the butt to be like, you know what? Maybe I got to get back on my horse. I actually do. I'm not like for mass layoffs. Don't get me wrong, but I think everybody has probably worked under this mutual understanding that middle management does nothing.
Yeah.
for the better part of 60 years. But,
Yeah.
it's like, well, there's this massive layoffs. I'm like, what percentage middle management? That's actually what I want to know when Microsoft does layoffs. Because I have friends and colleagues at companies who they would go from like Microsoft to like I'm not going to name names, a majorly funded project management tool. Okay. And then the project management tool has a bunch of bad releases in a row and delayed timelines. And it's like, what? I'm so confused. They got all this great talent from Microsoft. And then you find out like Microsoft, this person has been in middle management, like not even knowing how to code for the last decade. And
Yeah.
you're like, maybe this honestly for these people, it's probably good they're getting a little kick in the butt, right? Like
Mhm.
yeah. I'm not saying that it's better that the money just stays in the corporation's pockets, but they can get their skills up because at some point it was going to happen to them. So it's better
Mhm.
that they, you know. Anyways, that's my
Yeah.
hot take on
Yeah.
that.
No, I mean, I agree. I think, yeah, it's like it's obviously like a sensitive issue, and I know people who've been laid off, and it's a big kick in the butt, but it does push you to be better, and I think people's relationship with work and careers is like going through a seismic shift right now because of what's becoming possible with these tools. And when you think about it, like, yeah, you didn't really like doing that job. You did that job for money, and yes, sure, there was some security to it, but that security doesn't exist anymore. You're a
Mm.
quarter or a few quarters away from being laid off potentially now. And so is it better for you to wait for that to happen? Or is it better for you to start asking yourself, what am I really interested in doing? And how can I leverage AI to do that? Because it's a lot easier than a lot of people think. But it's just a question of like really having a focus and really having something that you are or want to be like competitive in and are really good at, or want to be really good at. And I don't think it takes that much. Like, it depends on how much you charge, but like having 1,000 or a couple thousand people subscribing to you, or having a few, I don't know what creator stats are, but just for SaaS, like having a couple thousand people subscribe to your platform or to your app or to your service, can often be enough for you to displace and replace all that income that you used to get from the cushy job. Like it's not a lot of people. You think about the 8 billion people in the world, a couple thousand people, like I think every obscurely tiny niche that you can think of has at least that.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. I really want to just kind of touch on this a little bit more because there's a very interesting thing you touched on there.
Hmm.
You are doing this for yourself, right? You've been doing this for yourself for how long have you been doing Stift like
Sift
individually?
we started Sift last May, so Sift is, yeah,
Okay.
under a year. We've been working on
And did
Sift.
you previously work in any position that was a little bit more secure and that type of thing?
I did. Yep,
And
actually I
yeah,
did.
okay.
Yeah,
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 because
my
I had a similar thing. I worked at a large marketing agency, and well, I was kind of more still at the operator level. It was definitely more secure.
uh-huh,
Uh,
uh-huh,
and I appreciate you, taking that leap. And I think for me, a big mental model that I worked through was that like Tim Ferriss, what's the worst that could happen model. And obviously you save your money, you're prepared to
yeah,
have a year or two of like savings, whatever. And then like, what's the worst that could happen? I'm in the same position. I still don't like what I do. And it's a year later, it's like, ah, boo. Um, but a big thing for me was I had to come to terms with the fact that the company I worked at had a massive layoff because they got bought out by a private equity firm and
mm,
didn't tell anybody. And then a couple months later, like massively, there was this like, we had a down quarter. I'm like, we
mm,
had been talking about quarters since I've been here. This is why am I hearing about profit margin?
yeah,
And like when we got like a cash inject, we got an investment, and the phraseology was that they were a partner, and then everything at the company from the top down started vibe changing. I was like, you got bought out by private equity, didn't you?
mm,
And I was like, ah. So even at medium-sized companies, this concept of social of job security is a farce.
mhm,
Like, really. I not to be like I genuinely think unless you're running your own company and you do have the ability to grind it out so you get more freelance contracts or get more customers, like that is the only job security. I think job security is like a false pretense.
yeah,
Like it's this axiom everybody has that I'm like, it's just not real. I'm like, this doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it could be Kool-Aid. It could also just be something that's outdated. Maybe it did exist at one point and it's just not really viable anymore. You know, whether it's permanent layoffs or whether it's restructuring or whether it's M&A and all this other stuff that's happening, like there's just a massive change and shuffle happening in how organizations are run. And to your point, like they're becoming more bottom heavy and a lot of those bottom quote unquote workers are maybe AI agents. So that's going to change things. So I think, yeah, a lot of people have to get real or have to think twice about this concept of job security. Yeah, at the end of the day, there's no more like the best job security, like you said, like it's working for yourself.
Yeah. All right. So last but not least, I just wanted to close things out by saying if there was any one thing that you would recommend for people to know prior to checking your product out, what would that be? And tell them exactly where to go so we can close this episode out and they can either get early access or, mattering on how the launch is, we'll see timing wise of posting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So two things. So one is, I think there are people out there doing. I wouldn't say there's anyone trying to copy us or do exactly what we're doing, but I would just ask users to ask themselves like, what would I want in a founder platform? How could I trust a founder platform to be founder first? And how can I trust that a platform like that is going to keep my best interests at heart? And my answer to that, or I think the reason we ask it is because I've spent the better part of over a decade doing startups. This is my fifth startup. And a lot of the issues we've seen in the startup world or in the entrepreneurship world are things we're trying to actively change and improve with Sift, whether it be from the beginning or more towards like down the road. But I think that we have a deep commitment and loyalty to just making this something that empowers entrepreneurs and empowers people to build their own business rather than like some quick, you know, um, company we're trying to build and scale for a profit. So I think that's like a big thing for us. There's more information about that on our website. And I think the rest of it, people can just kind of see for themselves by trying the website, checking out other content that we have. Um, be happy to have anybody who's a listener. I think there's still time to sign up for the early access by the time this gets published, so you can go and sign up on our website for the early access waitlist, and you could use a code AI Agents, and that'll give you a discount and promo for listening to this episode.
Awesome. Yeah. Please make sure to go check out everything that they're doing at Sift AI. Make sure you get the spelling right. It is Sift with two I's, SIAFT.ai. If you guys like this episode, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We really, really appreciate the work that you are doing here, Samim, and we appreciate everyone for listening. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Thanks, Dimitri. Appreciate you. Thanks.